Like 13,000, 14,000 people. You're welcome to come. You can do
Yeah.
it.
I'll watch.
He puts us all to shame. 70, what, 75, 77
No.
now or something.
He's 78.
78. He's, as soon as he got those new knees, he's been, it feels like such a sweet guy. Be like him. He's still at it too. He's doing, I guess his newest stuff is like, human factorsy, but like with AI, so here's all these new things that come up of human AI teaming and what are the biases that come with that and stuff like that. So I'll be interested to see what he's doing with that. Yeah.
How about Brittany?
I'm hoping to hear from her. She is supposed to have her second kid last month, January, but we're hoping she can come and talk in April.
Where's she at now? Because last I saw.
10.
Okay.
10.
Okay. She graduated Delaware, right?
Yeah. So.
Doing maternal separation. I remember she was really into sex
Yeah,
differences.
So the woman that she worked with was really big on microglia and microglia being affected by stress and synchronization.
Thanks for coming.
So the last time I talked to her, she was doing really interesting stuff. I think she'll be a good speaker.
I'm sure she'll be. She's always on top of it. Yeah, I'm on an AI team now. They're really interested. The AI guys are really interested in learning from neuroscience people about as a path to making new AI. So I haven't. It's kind of new, so I haven't quite figured it out. But kind of trying to inform them about how the brain works and hoping that leads to new architectures or ways of computing for the AI people. And I want to use their tools for my work. So, hey, how are you, sir? I need to start soon. I'm ready.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Brown Bag. Before we start, do we have any announcements? Any announcements? If not, Pamela will introduce our speaker.
Okay, so today we have Dr. Kevin Schmidt talking to us about teaching Marines to read. Kevin got his undergraduate degree from Wright State with both a behavioral neuroscience concentration. He received a SMART fellowship from the Air Force Research Laboratory to pursue his master's degree at George Mason University. So SMART is short for Science, Math, and Research for Transformation. I believe we currently have a graduate student who is a SMART scholar, Sasha Willis, who is working with Scott Wakamanuck. Kevin got a second SMART fellowship to pursue his PhD in cognitive neuroscience from Northwestern University. He is now a neuroscientist at AFRL. He is on the Act 3 team, the Autonomous Capability Team 3, providing Air Force operational applications of AI to human performance while translating principles of biological learning and memory to artificial implementations. And interestingly, he is an avid climber, avid rock and mountain climber. I would add that he's a serious and highly accomplished.
How about that? Thanks. It's really good to be back here. I didn't practice or time my presentation. Sorry, guys, but so I'll just keep looking at my watch. Keep it pretty informal. So what we'll talk about today is I'm going to introduce kind of the concept of implicit learning, talk a little bit about how we do those measures in the lab, talk about, how implicit learning isn't the whole story. There's really this memory systems interaction, which I think is where the field's at. Talk about how we measure those in the lab and then kind of get these things out of the lab and talk more about applied memory systems theory. How can we actually teach people things with these concepts? But I wanted to kind of go back to my roots here. This is really where a lot of the ideas started of these multiple memory systems for me. So the classic, Eiblin conditioning here, You have a tone and a shock that overlap in time, and that depends on certain brain structures, brainstem and cerebellum. If you put a gap in time between the tone and the shock, it engages a different set of brain structures. It requires the hippocampus to maintain this representation over time. So it's kind of where I started with these multiple memory systems. It's really the only behavioral neuroscience we'll get today. But it might be a fun conversation to have about how to connect this type of research with more cognitive neuroscience, cognitive psychology type work that I've been doing. Did I press it wrong? Oh, no, it was just slow. This is usually how I kind of start to lay the theoretical groundwork with patient HM, right? This guy, he had terrible epilepsy, it was debilitating, so they had to go into his brain and remove where this epilepsy was originating from. They took out his hippocampus. All of a sudden, he couldn't learn new things. He couldn't learn new faces, new scenes, new words. But over time, he found that he could learn certain things. Like you'll talk about the mirror tracing drawing, certain skills he was able to learn, but he would have no conscious recollection of having ever learned these skills before. So this is really where you started to see that there's multiple forms of learning and memory. This is the classic Squire framework. You have declarative learning and memory. I'm going to kind of slur my words here. Declarative, explicit learning and memory, conscious learning and memory. This is memory for facts and events. Like I remember I was born on March 23rd. That's a fact. I also remember what I was doing for my birthday, autobiographical memories. I can consciously re-experience, my birthday from last year. And this is in contrast to non-declarative memory. So memory that goes outside, that is going on outside your conscious awareness. So this is kind of where you start to see that you have these multiple forms of learning and memory. Again, so, I'm going to use all of these. We could debate about terms, declarative, explicit, conscious learning, and memory. The key part is there's a specific type of memory that depends on the hippocampus. That's really kind of the foundation here. I'll push back on that a little bit. And I'll give you an idea of how we study these things in the lab. How do you study something that goes on outside of awareness? So here's a task I worked with a lot. Serial interception sequence learning. So you have these scrolling cues going down the screen and you're at a keyboard, you're on D, F, J, and K. So it's kind of like Dance Dance Revolution, a little bit, or Guitar Hero. So you're intercepting the cues as they go over the spot, right? And it speeds up adaptively to keep you at 80% accuracy. You're just going along, but unbeknownst to you, there's a repeating second order conditional statistical structure of the sequence going on. Sometimes it's random patterns of cues going down the screen. And I can look at your behavioral data, and I can see that you're more accurate for the sequence that's repeating, the sequence that you practiced over and over again. But you have no conscious awareness that you're more accurate. So I'm looking at your behavioral data, I see that you're performing really well in your practice sequence compared to the non-practice FOIL sequences. When you ask participants, they're like, what are you talking about? I say, no, there was a repeating sequence. Did you know that? They said, I have no idea. You can show them a bunch of different sequences and see, do you recognize any of them? They're no better than chance at recognizing the sequence they practice versus not. Or you could ask them, hey, type out, there was a repeating sequence, type out what you think it is, try and recall that. Again, no better than chance. Because this task is driven by the implicit non-conscious learning system. Okay, so even more, I think a really cool result here too is I can give you the sequence. You can practice it consciously as much as you want, all right, but it won't help you in this task. So explicit pre-training doesn't help you, right? Because this task is driven by that non-conscious learning and memory system. And we can do some fun things with this task, look at, how flexible or inflexible the implicit learning system is. And you can come up with these sorts of principles of these characteristics of non-conscious memory. So what I'll put out there is, something that cuts across all of those things on the right side that I had up there of non-declarative memory. What I'm suggesting is that what it's doing is gradually learning the statistics through repeated exposure to material. All right, and so this is the task I was showing. You could call skill-based information, right? The key part is it doesn't depend on the hippocampus, right? So this is a whole set of learning and memory systems that you have that doesn't depend on that medial temporal lobe memory system. And so it's not really appropriate to say that you're recalling this form of memory, but rather it's sort of comes through in your procedure in actually doing the task, right? It's expressed through performance rather than recalling something or recognizing something consciously. This is just a basic principle of neuroplasticity. The important part here is it's happening everywhere in the brain, okay? In response to the demands of the task, the systems that are active are going to improve in their performance, throughout everywhere in the brain, right? And so we'll joke in the lab that this is the brain's machine learning algorithm, right? It's for this type of system to develop, you need a lot of practice, you need good quality feedback and a statistically regularized state space, and you will extract the statistical regularities of the experience. This just happens automatically. So I was developing some tests to look at these things in the lab and some more applied settings. So I'll talk about that a little bit. One problem that we have in the lab is you bring participants in and you have to run them through like an hour of tasks. That kind of made it hard to look at state-based changes was something I was really interested in. Is so like I work with the Air Force, they're really interested in, pilots suffering from acute hypoxia or something like that. And so you need a rapid measure of these sorts of things. So kind of instead of doing an hour-long study in the lab, you can do this. I developed this sort of like set of tasks that you could do quickly. You could get a quick measure of implicit memory, explicit memory. So I'll show you this task here in a second. You can do it at home. You can do it on your phone. It takes like 5 minutes. You get a bunch of these different measures. You do it, once or twice a day over 2 weeks, and then I can bring you into the lab with this sort of repeated measures design. And it becomes in that sense, it becomes amenable to something like fMRI. I know that's a big thing around here these days, I think, with this new fMRI facility. You don't need a participant to be in the scanner for an hour. You can do these tests in a matter of minutes. So this is just that pretty much the same task I was showing you before. Circles will generate in the middle of the screen and start to rhythmically come out to these spaces. So here you're on SX, K, and M, and you're intercepting the circle. It speeds up adaptively to keep you at 80%. So you can get a couple measures out of this one test. You can get a measure of implicit learning. So how good are you for your practice sequence compared to the FOIL sequences? Speeds up adaptively. You get a measure of processing speed. And in contrast to that, I can every once in a while put up an inhibition signal. So a stop signal reaction time we can embed in that task. And so instead of this automatic process where you're going through it, you have to now inhibit a signal or inhibit your response. Excuse me. Another task, working memory. So these patterns of blue and red dots will come out. They're sort of interspersed with each other. So your goal here would be to remember the pattern of the cues. And then in the second phase, you have to parse them apart in your head. So they're coming out blues and red are interleaved. You have to parse them apart and you have to tell me the pattern of the blues and then the pattern of the reds or vice versa. And so this is a quick measure of working memory. Also have a psychomotor vigilance task. So as fast as you can, when that circle comes out, it starts shooting out to one of the quarters, hit the button. So this is kind of the classic psychomotor vigilance task. It's a 4-choice reaction time task, I guess. And then the measure of explicit memory. So this is a 2-part task. These kaleidoscope images will come up on the screen one by one. I think for this it was like a second long each. You're memorizing them. You're going to have to remember them later. You're going to have to recognize them later. You put 2 up that are perceptually similar, and you ask the participant, which one of these did you recognize? And so it's a quick measure of implicit learning. I could show you guys a demo of this afterwards, but I think I'm just going to push for time. And so just a little bit of data on this. This is a correlation matrix of all those tests and subjective tests of wellness as well. I'm going to pull out the cool correlations here on the next slide. So, run 86 participants. We did like 100 participants doing all those tasks that I just showed you. How are these different measures related to each other? And you see some cool clusters. So the speed that you would achieve in that implicit learning task is highly correlated with the psychomotor vigilance task. So that's great. That's one cluster. Another cool cluster that we see is with executive functioning. So that inhibition task, the working memory task, those are correlated with that explicit recognition memory task, which is nice. So it was just nice to see that theoretically the measures that should be going together are, so things that require working memory correlated with things that are, theoretically explicit learning memory measures. And that's in contrast to the implicit learning to memory measure. So, this set of tasks was designed to look at state effects like hypoxia or something. I'm really into like getting stuff out of the lab. So me and a couple of my friends were going mountain climbing, and we were looking to kind of just geek out and take these tests with us. So it was a really high mountain. It was like 22,000 feet. So we had to sleep in these oxygen deprivation tents over like 4 months, where we'd slowly ramp down the oxygen so that by the time we left, we were sleeping at like, so me and two of my friends, we were sleeping at like 20,000 feet for preparation. And not, this is an N of 3, not really any results to speak of, but we did collect data at 19,000 feet on a mountain, which was really cool. Yeah, so that was just kind of a fun proof of concept of how we can get these tests out of the lab, can measure implicit memory, you can measure explicit memory, how are those things affected by hypoxia? Still a work in progress there. Yeah, and so, you could have these in the lab as well, maybe do some fMRI studies with this set of tasks. You just have to sit there and use your fingers, and so it should work in a fMRI scanner as well, where we can precisely control oxygen levels. Still working through the next steps on that. But there's a glaring theoretical problem that we have, right? The main thing that I want you guys to take away so far is that you have 2 types of memory, ones that you're consciously aware of, and then a whole bunch of other types of memory that are going on outside your awareness. There's a glaring flaw in this Squire framework. I'll talk through this one task here. So contextual cueing. This is like over 100 trials. You show these random arrays of T's and L's, over and over, 100 of them. But let's say, you have to find the T, okay, in this. After you do, let's say that 10% of the time, the T will come up in the bottom left of the screen, and then the other times it could come up randomly. Well, you see the participants become faster at finding the T at the bottom left, right? And that is very much looks like an implicit like effect. You're acquiring the statistical, regularities of this, that the T is going to come up at the bottom left. You're faster to see it. But the problem is that amnesics, like patient HM, for example, wouldn't be able to do this task, right? That's the result. So someone without a hippocampus can't do this task, but it doesn't really make sense, right? Because this is a statistical learning task now that depends on the hippocampus. And so that kind of breaks the model, or at least it needs to kind of be revised a little bit. And so, really the big idea there is, what I'm pushing is that implicit learning is happening everywhere in the brain, right? This is just a downstream consequence of neurons activating. It's going to happen automatically. It happens in every brain system, including the hippocampus, right? And so instead of having the sharp distinction between the two, really maybe we should start to look at how do these memory systems interact. So, in order to do that, I'll introduce another task here. The idea is, with high repetitions and good feedback, implicit learning will mature. This is how expertise matures. This is just something that's going to happen. So developing a task based on those ideas, we have a list of 12 images. So we can procedurally generate these kaleidoscope images. We can generate as many of them as we want. And because they're mathematically computed, you can come up with ones that are very perceptually similar to each other, right? So these are our stimuli. You've got these random kaleidoscope images, and you can have a twin that is perceptually similar. And so this is like a target versus a foil. And so what I did is generate a list of these 12 items, and you can present them, in sequence through milliseconds, whatever. And over and over again, what you're asking participants to do is study this list of images and tell me if you see one of those foil images. So there's a correct set of images, and 50% of the time there's a foil image. And your task is, was this the correct set of images that you studied, or was there an imposter? Is there an imposter among us? Was a big game at the time. And then you give the participant feedback. Were they right or wrong? Did they correctly identify the correct images, or did they miss a foil? And so you do this, many times. That's a key here. Hundreds of times you're studying this list in order, looking for this perceptually similar foil. And then what I can do is I can change the statistics of the task, right? So just a coarse measure of that, I can randomize now the order of those images and see when you can't rely on the statistics of the task, what happens to performance. And so this is kind of a crude set of slides, recent data, but there's not really much effect for the foil trials. But when there's no foil present, when it's the correct list of items, what you see is the sequence advantage again. Or when the items are in the practice sequence, you have a huge advantage, a sequence-specific performance advantage compared to when it's the correct list of images, but they're shuffled, right? And so this is a way that you can, in a recognition, so nominally this is an explicit recognition memory task, but it's starting to look at underlying statistical structure of that. So even though this is a explicit memory task, you can start to see that implicit like effects are contributing to performance. And I replicated and extended this, a number of times. One I'll show here, just looking at like the forgetting curve. And you'll see that the same effect, persists. So you have the sequence advantage, you're way more accurate at identifying the correct list of images when they're in the practice sequence compared to when they're shuffled. This effect is maintained across hours. It's maintained across days. I looked at D prime, like sensitivity and criterion effects as well. So participants are more sensitive in the sequence trials compared to the shuffled trials. Something I haven't really grappled with is there's also a criterion shift in sequence to shuffle, so that participants are more liberal and they're responding when the stimuli are shuffled. So that's something I really have to battle with there. But what I really am interested in is conscious, processing. And so how do you measure that in the lab? You can do these confidence measures. So you can ask participants as they're, after they're performing, after each trial, I can ask them, how well do you, how accurate do you think your response was? And what you would want to see to identify implicit learning is participants are performing very well, but subjectively they think they're guessing, right? And so how you can measure that is by measuring participants' guesses. So after every trial, then another study, I would ask them, how confident are you in your response? Did you definitely see the foil, or are you just kind of, maybe you saw it? Is this definitely the correct set of images, or maybe? And this is a terrible slide, so don't read into it too much because it's kind of wonky data to begin with, and I'm gonna interpret a null effect, which is a no-no. But what you see is that even though participants are performing very, very well, there's not necessarily a change in confidence. And so that's it's good for my story to say that might indicate that there's implicit like effects happening here. You're performing very well, but there's no change in your confidence compared to poor performance. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit here and talk about getting these things out, these ideas out of the lab even more. So here we're back on the mountain, and I'm really interested in, how can I apply these sorts of learning and memory concepts to actually teach people things better? So for example, when you're up on the summit of a mountain and you have to quickly orient yourself, on a map, on a topographic map up top, you have to be able to rapidly bring your knowledge to bear. So I'll wait for a second. You guys can tell me where on this picture you are on the map. That's the task here, trying to help people read maps better. How can the multiple memory systems theory help with this? You won't be able to answer it because you haven't done my app yet, I guess. And I don't know if I'm really teaching, the instructors anything they didn't already know. We've been doing this for a long, the professors know what they're doing, right? Where you're up there in front of the class, you're going through your slides, and you're teaching trainees, here's what the contour lines on the maps mean. Here's what a saddle looks like on a topographic map. Going through the slides, you're giving them this explicit knowledge of what these features should look like. And then it's, implicit learning is not really anything new to the instructors either, because we've always had to kind of go home and practice it on our own. In the military setting, these sorts of field exercises for practice get really expensive, and they're really long and drawn out. And because of that, there's a limited number of opportunities for practice. And remember, that's the key thing here. You need a whole lot of practice for this implicit learning representation to develop. And it fits really well with this multiple memory system. So you're getting this explicit scaffolding when you're in the classroom, going through the slides, and then you go out into the field and you're practicing to build up that implicit learning. So, the idea is to come up with something that can go in between, the classroom teaching as well as the field exercises to really ramp up the acquisition of that, skilled performance, that expert performance based on, implicit processes. And so simulation-based training is a good way to do that because cheap, it's inexpensive, and you can get hundreds of practice repetitions in a cost-effective way without having to do these long, drawn-out field exercises is the idea. So I developed an app here, partnered with Charles River Analytics, who are doing the real software stuff. They would generate these topographic maps from corresponding environments in the Unity engine. So here's a saddle here, here's a saddle. And because it's procedurally generated, you're able to come up with hundreds of these scenarios. And what I did was I went in and I used my background in psychology to figure out how can I present this sort of material in a way that encodes it into that implicit part of the brain, I guess is my thinking there. And so using the same sort of, set of principles that for implicit learning to develop, you need large number of sets of reps, you need to give good feedback, and it needs to be this like statistically regularized state space. If you accomplish this, implicit learning and expertise will develop. So I coded up something in PsychoPy. Here's the idea of the procedural content generation. So you have like a fixed set of parameters that you want to do. Like I want my mountains to be within this range, and I want this sort of vegetation sort of parameters, and I can let the Unity engine generate a whole bunch of these scenarios that come out as topographic maps and corresponding videos walking through a terrain environment. I can get hundreds of them and I can repeat it. And so here's sort of the task that I developed. You would simulate walking through an environment. And then I would rapidly ask you to orient yourself on the map, give you feedback, assess your performance, and repeat hundreds of times. So very quickly trying to get you a lot of practice trials is the idea of what it would take to build up implicit learning for this type of task. I think I'm flying through this, so I will show you a demo here of what that looks like currently. Thank you.
This one? Or the other one?
So a lot of coding,
You won't see them there. Yeah. Tell me which one.
Oh,
Is this one?
no, it's the other one.
Okay.
Thanks. So my wrists hurt just thinking about all the coding I had to do for this, and as you can imagine. It's okay if it doesn't pull up. We could do it at the end too.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just see. I'm going through my slides quick, so just be good for discussion. What's cool about all these tools I'm developing is they're deployed online. So, you could do them anywhere in the world, whether that's on a mountain or you don't need a laptop either. You could do it on your cell phone. Do we get it?
No, it doesn't work. So.
Okay, that's okay. I'll show you guys at the end. But so did some preliminary testing. Does this actually help people get better at map reading? So I worked a lot with the Naval ROTC at Northwestern, get their feedback. I'm going to show you guys just a little bit of data. The important thing was getting the sets and reps up really high. How fast can I get people to make these decisions? And what we were able to accomplish is like 150 topographic map decisions in about an hour of training. And okay, so this is orientation on that map. How accurate are you? Participants get better. That's the general idea here. Your accuracy improves. Your angle of orientation, your degrees off from the correct answer is less. You're more correct. You're more accurate. You're able to orient yourself more accurately. And then so what I did is I took a whole bunch of different tests from earlier studies, figured out which maps are easier or hard, which of those kind of training scenarios were easier or hard, and I kind of came up with a pre and post test way to assess performance here. And again, participants are better, so you're more accurate after doing this this 100 reps of practice with the app. You're more accurate in a post test compared to a pre test. The biggest thing is it's just kind of like proof of concept. The biggest thing is we were able to get the practice repetitions really high. So getting about 2 of these training scenarios per minute compared to the hours long that you would have to do these field exercises. Getting the reps up to where we want them, about 50 to 100, you start to see this implicit. Yeah.
I had a question about their view. So when they're looking at it from they have to guess where it is. Look around, or is it?
We do that. That was some of the feedback that we got from the ROTC people, because at first it was like a straight line. Oh, you're driving them over there. I'm sorry. I went back some. Yeah, and their feedback was, well, when you're out there and actually doing it, you're looking around and trying to orient yourself. What I didn't want to do was give the participant control, because the most important thing was to push the repetitions. I want you to be making fast decisions, right? Yeah. And so I'll show you at the end, the video, you would move forward a little bit, it would circle around, and then I would force you to make a decision really, really quickly. But it's not in your control, so that is an important. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was also wondering how you make sure that
fixed
versus randomly have them looking.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, that was not something I really cared about as much, because the idea is that would wash out over time. So there probably are a bunch of bad trials, your phone rings and you look away or whatever, and all of that's sort of averaged into the data. But with a large number of repetitions, you're gonna get to the right place eventually, is the idea. So there was a lot of bad scenarios too, where you're walking straight into a tree, right? It's procedurally generated, and always have control over making sure it was good videos. I wasn't as concerned about that as making them quickly, even if it's a bad one, you move on to the next one, and very quickly to get to a good scenario.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't realize you're driving over there. Yeah. Yeah, so just to summarize that, we successfully instantiated a high repetitions simulation-based training protocol, and we got this high volume of practice, cheaply deployable, internet-based type environment to help increase your sets and reps of experience with topographic map reading. And the land navigation instructors liked it as well. So I'm not really sure where it's transitioning, if it's actually been acquired by the Navy yet or not. I'm not really sure where that's going, but the proof of concept of being able to do this sort of task on a mobile device is there. That's that's really all I wanted to say. I guess I have time, so I'm going to go into these where I'm going with my work now a little bit. This is where we're going to really go off the deep end. So I'm on an artificial intelligence team, and they're really interested in what they learn from brain science to build new algorithms. I'm slurring my words a lot with the declarative memory and explicit memory and conscious memory, and a real expert would sort of, pick at me with the difference of those terms. But I'm really fascinated by consciousness. That's me going off the deep end here. Why is it that some memories feel like something? I can time travel back to my birthday last year and vividly re-experience it, versus other memories are going on completely outside of awareness, these different ways of representing the information. I'm fascinated by it. This team that I'm on the Air Force Base is also really interested in consciousness. I think they want to make like Skynet and Terminator and make conscious robots and stuff. And I'm just excited because, they're eating up this multiple memory systems theory, right? And there is a lot of history there of how can you use what you know from, looking at the multiple memory systems to build new AI. Oops. This is good. Yeah. Second to last one. That's fine. I'm almost done anyways. So, and so here's kind of the same concept of these two systems, one that's implicit, extracting statistical regularities, versus hippocampal-based conscious memory that's doing a different kind of computation. It's the hippocampus, you're able to study a list of words, one time, and you have this very rich structure to the memory, right? You have, temporal context, where different words that are close together are more likely to be recalled. When you study a list of words and you ask participants, hey, recall the list of words, there's a rich structure to how they would recall these words, even though they only studied it once, right? And that's in contrast to kind of neural network-based learning or reinforcement learning, where the current machine learning tools, they're operating a lot like that implicit system. So it takes a large number of training trials. They're looking at statistical co-regularities among the features. And so they're starting to, in the AI world, converge on this two-system model as well. And this is the idea of where Google DeepMind used this kind of architecture, where you have the hippocampus that's rapidly storing the pixels on the screen in a certain type of format, an instance-based, non-parametric type representation. And then they slowly interleave this with this kind of slow learning model that's slowly updating. And this is how they beat chess and Go with their AIs, was through this multiple memory systems type architecture. Can you go to the last slide? And this in my mind parallels a lot with this tried and true complementary learning systems model from neuroscience, where you have memories that are first stored in this conscious representation, and then at night when you're sleeping, you're slowly interleaving that fast type of learning and memory. You're slowly interleaving it with the broader neocortical model at night. And it's important because in the AI world, they have this big problem of catastrophic forgetting, where if you try to update your model too quickly, you forget, the model forgets everything, right? And so the idea is that the way the brain's doing it with these two systems, one that's hippocampal dependent and all the other systems, this is how the brain is overcoming this catastrophic forgetting, is by rapidly acquiring the conscious experience and then slowly interleaving it with that slow statistical model in the neocortex. Can you go back to my thank you slide? This is just going to sum it up. So implicit learning, the idea I'm putting forward today is it reflects a general principle of neuroplasticity. It's happening everywhere in the brain. Every neuron has the capacity for this kind of learning. It happens outside of awareness. It depends on practice. And this type of processing is fundamentally important to the development of expertise in automatic performance. But importantly, because it's happening everywhere, this type of memory also coexists with explicit knowledge. It's also going on in the hippocampus, maybe as the foundation of that conscious acquisition of knowledge. And my last statement here, I guess, is if you want to teach people how to read topographic maps, you need to leverage the multiple memory systems so that if you find yourself on the summit of a mountain, when you're lacking hypoxia, you're able to, use both of these systems to bring your knowledge to bear, to orient yourself on the map. So thank you.
Do you have any questions while I try to load those videos?
Yeah, let's do that. Yes.
Yeah. I'm wondering how this might possibly fit with spatial learning, because you have a hippocampal component, and yet some people seem to learn mostly through their caudate nucleus by learning where you turn left and you turn right, which seems much more implicit.
Yeah. Yeah, like dead reckoning type turn left, turn right versus other like landmark based forms of memory. I thought through a lot of that stuff when I was doing the background for the simulation based training one. I guess what I would say is I think in some respects it's all spatial, or I mean at least with the conscious memory, I think of it all being spatial. It all kind of comes together with the hippocampus, and even if it's not necessarily a spatial navigation task, like maybe you're trying to think of a non-spatial example, but with all of these things, maybe, if it's using the hippocampus, you could think about it in terms of like navigating through a space. But yeah, in terms of how the implicit learning fits with that, I'm not sure. I would think of the dead reckoning more of the
Yeah, I was
implicit.
just wondering if you could give trials, where you're seeing these turns and you need to turn left, you need to turn right, and so you're learning some of that stimulus response
Yeah,
at this, and
Right.
maybe then when the hypoxia kicks in, you could fall back onto that. And that would be
Exactly.
stronger. I mean, it's
No,
the
that's
same
a-
sort of idea.
absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely the same sort of idea. Yeah, I'm not willing to make the jump of saying whether like dead reckoning or turn left, turn right, and
Uh-huh.
counting the number of paces rather than having a spatial map, mapping that onto the implicit and explicit. I mean, I would not push back on that,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, I definitely see that aligning. Building a spatial map and navigating it through this sort of like spatial representation versus something that's more, like you said, stimulus response. I
Thanks
like
very
that a
much.
lot. Thanks. Hey,
We have
Scott.
one of those demos.
Thanks.
So I have a couple for them. One is, does the implicit learning, the same kind of interference effects that you get with when we have explicit learning used? So for example, in your pattern recognition, if you make a change to that pattern, does it now take longer to latch onto this new pattern because the previous one is now just, or people look at things like that?
Yeah, I think my strong argument would be that when you change the statistics of the task, even just minimal, like you were saying, you're kind of having to relearn not all of it, but a lot of that task. It doesn't transfer. Implicit learning doesn't transfer. So when you make those changes, you're having to relearn the model, right? And so the argument is that is sort of like how neural networks are working. Once you change it a little bit, that's the idea of like catastrophic forgetting. You change the statistical relationship so that the model can't deal with it, right? It completely throws it off.
So my second comment is that some of the things in the literature that people talk about as being statistical learning can be explained by much simpler things like timing or sort of predictive methods. Again, are rampant in our because our perception is behind time. So in order to act effectively in the world, we have to be predicting something. So
I agree.
I think that in the implicit learning of like sort of more elaborate patterns, I think that was more difficult to map it to finding mechanisms there.
Yeah, priming is a glaring flaw in what I'm putting forward of, taking large number of sets and reps to develop. Priming happens in one shot too. I think, sometimes when I try to talk myself out of that hole, I'll say that, if you did that many times, you would be extracting the statistical regularities out of it. The thing on predictive stuff is I definitely think the brain's doing it. You know, when I go down the like the free energy principle or predictive processing type things, it's like everything's sort of doing it. And so it doesn't really help me for, you know, trying to distinguish between the two memories, because I would say that explicit memory is also doing that. I think that one thing though is maybe like how far in advance or how far in advance is it doing the prediction, with the idea that, you know, if it's doing kind of this forward pattern completion type thing, type mechanism, you know, it would be related, like A is related to B related to C, and it's in this kind of forward mechanism, versus explicit memory doesn't always work that way. You could, you know, think about what, you know, you can imagine, go back in time and learn this association from C to A. And I think that would also be, you know, used for predicting what's going to happen next. But in terms of like the mechanism, it's not kind of a forward prediction, you know, in that sense. I don't know if that makes
I
sense.
think those concepts all can, there's a lot of relationships there, and so different camps can sort of look at things, talk about them in seemingly different ways, but there seems to be a lot of overlap. Yeah, and I think, you know, one, priming is happening,
Right.
prediction is happening. You know, another thing's happening with them is like, okay, how can you separate those?
Yeah.
And the temporal aspect may be one way
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of like everything's doing statistical learning, you know, is a big idea. Or maybe all it is statistical learning in the end. Yeah, I think that's sort of, you know, there's some AI people that are really pushing these ideas right now that you can explain it all with statistical learning. I'm not that well read on it, but they talk a lot about like for how's the hippocampus actually acquiring the memory. They talk about pattern separation and pattern completion. I think those types of mechanisms are different, right? You're laying down a memory trace rapidly through this pattern separation type mechanism, and then the prediction would be the pattern completion. But that sort of pattern separation mechanism is not correlation based, right? It's not looking at statistics between those, but it's just, you know, rapidly laying down a memory trace right now, capturing the pixels on the screen and encoding it in a format, you know, a certain kind of format to later interleave it into that broader model.
Yeah, I think the issue that some people have is that when you use the term statistical learning, it sounds like the brain is actually trying to compute frequencies and things, but in fact, that can be captured just by how many times did this happen? This one happened more than this one, therefore there's a bigger strength to this one. And
that's what I say.
And our words are, oh, it's statistical learning, but that's not it's a description that makes sense to scientists, but it's not the way the brain is like calculating things. It's just some things they're building up over time. More often you see some, but that's stronger than the other. I mean,
yeah,
just sort of build up and I think that people talk about statistical learning as if the brain is actually doing the calculations as opposed to there's some really simple ways in which this can happen.
Well, I mean, the simple way that, I mean, what I think it's like Hebbian plasticity, right? Neurons that fire together, wire together. That's the fundamental statistical extraction. You know, that's what I think it is. Yeah, I don't.
It's interesting when you talk
Yeah.
domain, they have some, you know, who are more cryptic, they don't recognize relatively simplistic neural result in those more complicated looking things, but the brain isn't doing complicated things on the outside, it's just doing stuff that.
Yeah, I agree. I get, but then on the other hand, there's, you know, I think that there is something special going on with hippocampal dependent learning that's not extracting correlations between events, these things happen more frequently. And so it's going to be a stronger representation. It's a different form of learning that doesn't depend on correlate. They'll say like causal learning, which I don't even really know what that means, but like that's, that's sort of the contrast to that. But if you're, in one argument is that I like to say that kind of falls apart with the priming, but is if you're extracting this memory with just one shot learning, you can't really do statistics on one, right? And so it's a different type of process that doesn't depend on, frequency and co-occurrence and things like that. It's a different type of acquisition mechanism that's not Hebbian. It's not correlational. It's a different kind of computation. Yes.
So one level of expertise is you get very good at something based on experience, that's based on high regularity, and you've been exposed to it many, many times. High reps, right? But there's also another level of expertise, and the experts is people we want the most when we have novel situations that, tricky problems that have not happened before. So you would say that it would require very different kinds of training for that level, that other kind of level of expertise.
Yeah, maybe like a higher level of expertise, you're saying, or like, I guess, yeah. So maybe it's like an expert would be able to something that they've never practiced before. They would still be able to bring their knowledge to bear on that. I think that I would say that even for higher level things like that, like even something like you have like perceptual priming, which is a very low level visual priming type thing, but you also have conceptual priming, which is like very complicated type tasks. But that is still, you still get priming effects with these sorts of like more abstract type phenomenon. And so, I would wonder if, even at this higher type, more like, more, I don't know the word for it, but like a more holistic, like within your area of expertise, maybe there's some sort of, implicit like priming, implicit like mechanism happening at that higher level. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, I guess. Something, analogical reasoning and stuff like that, right? Things like that. I don't really know how to map that on. But yeah, what I would say, and I guess you would counter to that is that, so an expert, one thing that I think is implicit learning doesn't transfer. And so based on that kind of like fundamental principle in my head, how does the expert bring their knowledge to bear on a situation that they've never seen? I'm not really sure. Maybe there's enough overlap, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you have the example of like the firefighter who goes into the room and they've never seen this particular situation before, this particular fire, but there's still some intuition, some sort of expertise of like, you need to get your guys out. And I think that, there's enough maybe overlap in terms of, the heat and the smoke and stuff like that, that you're able to get this sort of like implicit like effect, even though it's a new situation. You've never seen this particular thing, but it's similar enough that you were able to bring that sort of expert knowledge to bear. So I mean, I don't know how that fits with in your head, what you think's going on, but
Should also be able to generalize, to abstract out from specific instances, even though experts like firefighters, they have a lot of instances saved in their mind. They actually are able to respond to new situations because they generalize, they abstract out some kind of theoretical or semantic patterns from those instances. They don't necessarily recall one of those instances. They recall something like a pattern.
I wonder if it's helpful more to, if I think about it like a memory system interaction, like I'm saying, is so you got these highly specific type, models that are good at, detecting the smoke or detecting the heat from the fire. And then there's this other mechanism that's able to bind it together and like generalize or abstract and stuff like that, but I don't really know. Other questions? Hey. Go hard.
Between location accuracy and orientation accuracy.
No, it's not, it doesn't work that way. Can I, or, you want to do it?
Control it through the mouse. Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay. I can get you really good at math too. The task isn't amenable to parse that out. I'll show you what it is here. So let's see. So this is the task. You have all these videos that are reloaded. You're going through the terrain. Okay, now really quick. So here, now I have to orient myself on the map, do that 360 that I was talking about. I think I'm going downhill, go like that. Is that right? No, I wasn't too bad. 35 degrees off. But there's not really a location thing. It's all orientation based right now. I fixed the location. Go on to the next real quickly. Do that. So yeah, that's the kind of the proof of concept with this task. It's not anything that the teachers didn't know. Like we've always been doing that. You're in the classroom learning how to do long division, and then you go home with your practice book and you practice it over and over again, and that's how you get good. But I think the instructors eat it up when you're able to show like there's science behind this and put words to it, and they seem to like it to see that there's some theoretical kind of like backbone to that. Can I show the other app too? Thank you. Yeah.
So when you're running them, like you're having sets of map each time, and then the video is anywhere.
Yeah, and then once you get to a certain criteria, then you'll move on to the next map. And the worlds are really big, so one thing I was really interested in is kind of going from dead reckoning and landmark type forms of learning, and then how do you get to like a generalized sort of like map in your head. There's Chris Wickens has words for, like I've read a lot of his, and like Tony Arrett's work on that, and these different levels of gaining map knowledge. But I didn't really see any evidence of that, of like people learning like kind of the broader topography of the map. But I think if you had enough practice you would. But it was
maps, like they're not real maps, they're just.
Yep. Yeah, they're just generated. But I mean, maybe like you could be like, okay, Army guy, you're going to Afghanistan or whatever, maybe you need to rapidly learn this terrain you're going in. Maybe something like this could be.
And so each one of those squares is like the elevation, topography, possibly be theoretically.
Yeah. More or less. Okay, yeah, and so this is a set of tasks. I really geeked out on this. I thought it was really cool. Really, I like seeing like the structure of cognition and how all these different measures, like how working memory loaded onto that explicit memory. I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, you could just ask people some subjective questions of wellness. You could do this on your phone. I'll start. So this is that implicit learning task. So you can see it gets really quick. So I'm intercepting it. When the yellow one comes up, you have to inhibit it. And so, you guys wouldn't know it, but there's a repeating second order conditional sequence embedded in all these random cues. And you can go into my data and you can see that I'm more accurate for those than the random dots. Every once in a while, there's that inhibition signal. Here's the working memory version. So now I have to parse out the blue and then the red. It's good. blue. And so this is, you know, maintaining information over time and manipulating it. So theoretically, that's what, I missed that one. Theoretically, that's what working memory is. None of this is validated, by the way. It's nice that they are, the measures that should be correlated are correlated, but it's not really like compared to the gold standards. Here's the psychomotor vigilance task. Respond as quick as you can. Yeah, so maybe this could be we could use this in your guys' new fancy expensive fMRI here or something. Sure, we all love that. Okay, and then the explicit memory test. So you're studying this list of kaleidoscope images on the screen. You're going to be tested on them later. You have to tell me which one you saw during the study phase versus which one's one of those novel foil sequences. Some 50% of them repeat here. That's just kind of a measure that you're paying attention to. If you miss all the repeated cues, I don't think you were paying attention. I think I can skip this part to get to the test. Okay, and then the test. So which one of these two did I see? Maybe the left? What do you guys think? Yes, left, left, right? That's it.
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks, guys. I don't know. I want to give another thanks to the behavioral neuroscience concentration. This is, you know, where all the ideas started and stuff. I was joking earlier, you know, I remember playing like water pong in here during psych club and stuff. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to be back, and thanks for the invitation. And, you know, I really appreciate your guys' mentorship and working in your labs and stuff. So thanks. Mike, you came in just for this?
Nah, I'm still coming.
They let you in here?
Coming in later. Going home earlier.